let me ask you this question. If you've ever flown in a plane, how many of you would be happy if it's windy, it's got fog, it's raining? How many would be happy if the pilot said, yeah, I've read about this on how to land this plane under these conditions, we should be all right? I wouldn't be. Or what about you're going in for surgery and you say to the doctor, how many times have you done this surgery? And he or she goes, yeah, I've read about it. You wouldn't feel much confidence, would you? Well, the same goes with learning. All right? I understand, is what I've titled this one. Because a very famous proverb, I hear, I forget, I see, I remember, I do, I understand. I think that's what it is, okay? So I understand. I hear, I forget. So teachers talking in the classroom, explaining how to do something, straight out, right? You see it, it's visual, yeah, that sort of makes sense. But then, you see a maths problem being done, you go, yeah, that makes sense. But then you got to do it yourself and you can't do it. So when it comes to study, it's the same thing. Saying to me, oh yeah, I just read over my notes, is not really what I would consider an effective study technique. So you need to do more than that. You need to make it active. You need to make it, 3 things is what you're going to try and do here. All right. Let me explain these symbols here. This is not a Mercedes-Benz sign, and this is not a loaf of bread. Let me explain. This here is sort of the way that we get information. When we listen to information, right, when we experience information in the world, we decipher it, our brains decipher it, visually is one of them. Right? We see it, we go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And if it's a powerful visual symbol, it's even better. So we've talked about the importance of colour. Being in the middle frame of reference, for example, not just from left to right, to left to right. All that visual stimulation goes into our visual part of our brain, or processing part. Then we have auditory, which means sound. So we hear stuff. So you hear people talk, you hear music, you hear the beats, you hear the frequency, right? You hear the strumming pattern as you're trying to learn the guitar. You hear people talk about stuff. That's auditory. Then you have another part which is called kinesthetic, right? Kinesthetic is movement, like kinetic energy. It's movement. It's doing things with your hands. And this is a brain, believe it or not, right? It's not a loaf of bread, it's a brain, right? So there's the 2 hemispheres, there's the brain. Now to get the information from your short-term memory where you just hear it and see it and do it, into your long-term memory, you need repetition, right? You need repetition. You need to go over and over and over and over again, but it works best if you can learn something in these 3 ways. So when you learn something, when you study any material, any subject area, you want to make it highly visual. So you want to be drawing pictures, you want to be drawing flow diagrams to see how they connect and mind maps. You want to be able to do it in color, right? So there's lots of techniques around, like my classes of doing things called doodle notes, where they're colouring in, like a little picture or a doodle, and as they're colouring in, they're reinforcing both visual but also kinesthetic, because they're actually using their hands to take notes, not like a lot of young students these days. I'll just take a picture of that, click, goes into their camera roll, never to be seen again. So you're actively taking notes, right? So you're visually seeing it, but then you've also got to hear it. And so one technique for study that I suggest is that you actually teach someone. Or you teach your cat. Or you teach your frog, or whatever pet that you have. You teach a mosquito on the wall. You teach an invisible person. You teach. And so when you teach, you get yourself a little whiteboard, you get yourself some whiteboard markers, and you get your textbook. You get your notes, you get your study notes, right? You get your flashcards, whatever they might be, you get the information there and you teach them that bit for the next 10 minutes, right? And when you do that, you're making it visual. So you're drawing pictures of cells, or you're drawing, you're drawing, let's say, something history. Let's say you're drawing, the country and where they invaded from and where they had this war or whatever it might be that you're learning. So you're making it visual, but you're also talking about it. You're articulating, you're speaking, you're making sounds, right? You're making questions. When you teach someone, right, students have questions. And their questions get you, as the teacher, to rethink how you explain it, to explain it from a different angle to see if they understand it. Well, you need to do the same thing when you teach your invisible person in your room, or your cat or bird or whatever. You've got to teach yourself, and I'll simulate this in a second. And you're making it kinesthetic by drawing, right? By drawing. Drawing's powerful too. Not only is it powerful because it forces you to actually make a representation of a concept that you're trying to get across, it's also making it a little bit humorous as well. I mean, when I draw in class, my drawings, as you can tell, look sometimes nothing like what they're supposed to be. But kids laugh, I have a bit of a laugh, and that laughing at the drawing makes it fun. And that helps you remember. If you've seen the previous video, remember things that are fun, not things that are mundane. So teaching someone really gets you to use your visual, auditory and kinesthetic modes of learning, we call them in teaching, and to put it into long-term memory if you repeat it frequently. Let me give you an example of what I did when I was at uni, and this is how I could get really great marks in exams, and I knew my stuff because I learnt like this. What I did, back in the olden days, I had paper on the wall, and I had my textbook, and I would be teaching, I had paper and a whiteboard, right? So I was teaching my cat. I was teaching my cat biochemistry. I was teaching my cat physics. I was teaching my cat how to integrate and do calculus. The thing is when I was teaching them that, I was visually drawing it. So I was drawing on the whiteboard, doing the maths problems, doing the chemistry problems, and I was teaching them. I was talking to them about it. And I was asking questions. So when it became really hard, when a concept became really hard and I didn't know it and I had to look at my textbook, I would ask them questions. So something like this, right? I'll be going, okay, so this enzyme reaction is an allosteric enzyme that changes shape and conforms to the structure of the substrate. Okay, so I've just read it from my textbook, and now I'm going to teach it to my imaginary person or my cat. Okay, did you know that when an enzyme is in a reaction, it joins with the substrate and it conforms, or it changes shape? What does conform mean? Well, conform means to change shape to something. Yeah, good question. All right, let me just draw that for you. And then I'll draw it. And in doing that, I'm reinforcing that concept visually, auditory, and kinesthetic, right? And so then I go, yeah, and I'll explain it again. I think I know that now. I'll then go to the next bit. And then I'll go, okay, and this enzyme here undergoes a catalyzed reaction and phosphorylates this particular side group. Okay, what does that mean? And then my cat would go, what does phosphorylation mean? And I go, okay, well, phosphorylation means this. And I would explain it to them. And then I go, let me draw it for you. And I'll draw it. And I'll check it with my textbook. Yep, that's what it is. Okay. Now, does that make sense to you? It doesn't? Okay, let me explain it one more time so you get it. So when you get the enzyme here, and this group here does this and moves over, and you're explaining it. And so what I'm doing is, while I'm teaching my cat this very hard content, I'm visually drawing it. I'm speaking about it. I'm drawing it here. I'm asking questions. I'm going back and saying, does that make sense? And even though it's a rhetorical question, right? You're asking yourself if it makes sense, but verbalizing it and then changing the way that you explain it really gets you to understand it. And then you can say at the end of your study session, okay, let's just go back and let's review, hello, repetition. Let's just go back and review what we've done. And then I would draw it on my my paper wall, right? I would draw a mind map and just summarize the key points, right? I'm not writing everything, summarizing the key points of what I did. Okay, then let's say 2 days later, maybe a day later, right? Look at the study tip about frequency of memory revision. So maybe the next day, when I came to study that same thing, before I even looked at the board, I would do what teachers do now. I would say, okay, what did we do last lesson? Well, last lesson we looked at allosteric enzymes and how they change shape and conform to the structure of the substrate. And a specific example of that is we looked at phosphorylation. Now, what was the process of phosphorylation? Good question that you asked, let me tell you, right? And so what you're doing is you're recapping the information that you learned. Now, let's say that you can't remember everything. That's fine. That's part of the learning. So then you go, what does phosphorylation do? Oh, I forgot that bit. Go back up to your mind map. Ah, that's right, phosphorylation was this. And then you go back and you do phosphorylation again. And every time you do it, you're going to find that you're going to go through that information a lot faster because it's going to recall it. You've drawn it, you've talked about it, you've done it so many different ways that you know that concept inside out. It's not just recall of information with a flashcard, right? You know it inside out. You can draw it, you can explain it, etc. And then of course you add more and you build up your knowledge. And every time you build up your knowledge, you keep going back and revising some of the key points. And you do it quickly. You do it quickly because you haven't got all day to do everything in detail, but it's just keeping it there bubbling away. And when you do that, you find that you will understand it better, you will be able to recall it better, you'll be able to apply the knowledge better. So I challenge you that when you study that you do, right, the information like this, rather than just, I'm going to make flashcards, right? That's step one. Step two is going from your flashcards, your summary notes, and your textbook, and going over it in an active way that activates all these areas to get it into long-term memory. And I will guarantee you, right? Wish I was rich because then I'll give a monetary prize. But I guarantee you, having experience with this, you will know it better, and you'll be able to use it and synthesize the information because you've done it. You've explained it to people. You've taught people. You've gone through the hard yakka. Your brain has rewired, right? The plasticity of your brain has rewired. You've gone through the hard work, and now it understands. And so that's what I challenge you to do with your study. So I call this one, I Do, I Understand. We're using a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, and teaching at the end, and teaching someone helps you integrate it into your long-term memory. Hopefully that makes sense. Grab something that you find really hard, give this technique a go, and you'll be amazed at how powerful it is. See you in the next video.